Our competition would ask you to do a lot of extra shopping. With the Dodge Shadow and Plymouth Sundance, you get it all under one roof. Chrysler, changing the landscape.
If you are the person who chooses the copier for your company, the copier that everyone counts on every day, which copier are you going to choose? Today, more people pick Canon copiers for features that make everyone's job easier, for the price that fits into the budget. Above all, they pick Canon for peace of mind. Because after all, this is the copier that everyone counts on every day. Canon, it's the comforting choice.
The early days of the student demonstrations gave Chinese citizens hope that they would finally be able to get a true picture of their country from their own television network and newspapers.
But when the army cracked down and the old censorship returned, citizens were once again in the dark. Tonight, the Journal's Catherine Olson reports on how people in North America are sending information on China back to China.
The deadline is fast approaching for tonight's news bulletin to China. For the last 2.5 weeks, Chinese students at the University of Toronto have been scouring the international press for stories about the turmoil in their country. A synopsis is cut and pasted together. Then the fax machine is used to get around the government censors. And the day's highlights are fired off to student organizations and businesses in China. Hai Sheng and his friends want to provide an alternative to the official line of the Chinese government.
Latest news, the government said, only 300 people died, and among them, a majority are soldiers. Only 23 students were killed. So that's totally lie. That's why we want to, break this kind of lie.
Information is extremely important there because most people are not aware, simply not aware of what the government is doing. And by doing this, they will know what kind of government they have.
Cheng Qing is a PhD student who did his undergraduate work in Beijing. Have you talked to any friends in China, in Beijing?
Oh, yes, I did. That was one day after the massacre, and I called one of my friends. And she was sleeping. She has no idea about what's going on there. I mean, of course, that's one day after that. But I told her that 2,000 people were killed, and she was totally shocked.
China! China! The Toronto students are not working in isolation. In Montreal, Wu Changming led a demonstration. Then he faxed news of the event to student groups in Beijing so they would know that Canadians were behind them. Similar efforts are being made from campuses around North America. A computer network is used to share information. Then faxes are sent off to any number they can get through to. Ironically, the Chinese government was promoting the fax to update its telecommunication system. Now it's coming back to haunt them. Kenneth Chung is a Montreal businessman who has donated the use of his fax machine.
The students themselves have a very tightly knit network, and the networking is tremendous. And anytime when we want to coordinate the activities, not only here in Montreal and Beijing, but also the rest of Canada, sometimes we have information faxed to Beijing, and Beijing faxed to Toronto, Vancouver, New York, and Paris, London. And this networking is very, very efficient.
In Vancouver, Michael Lee is charging fax calls to his home number, but he's finding it very difficult to get through to China.
Last night, we faxed our information back to China by the fax numbers we've got from the network, and we tried 150 times, and only 7 times we got through.
They are in the unique position of trying.
These students in Canada keep gathering the news any way they can. Their computerized grapevine continues because they believe that at least some of their information is getting through.
What is your personal reaction to the news blackout and to the stories that the government has been feeding the people?
Hatred. I mean, I hate them, really. But I know they will do this because the government legitimacy is based on this kind of tricks. I mean, I'm sure if they broadcast massacre pictures around the country, the government is going to be overthrown very soon.
Tanks may have temporarily silenced their friends in China, but this group of amateur journalists thinks their efforts will help revive the struggle for democracy in their homeland. For the Journal, I'm Catherine Olson.
For students and journalists in Beijing, the information getting back to them must be anything but reassuring. The cold, hard facts of the crackdown can do little to ease their fear. In Beijing, we have reached Patrick Moore, a freelance journalist with close ties to the leaders of the protest movement. Patrick Moore, what are the student leaders who you know or know about doing now?
Most of the student leaders have left Beijing. Their main purpose is to go to the provinces and spread the word to the people in terms of the atrocities that have occurred here and the position of the government. Other student leaders are in hiding. They could be anywhere. Certainly they're not going to announce their presence.
Was there any organized decision or activity on the part of the student leaders as to what to do after the massacre in Tiananmen Square?
I'm not aware of any organized decision-making process. I think this basically is an individual decision at this point. Some leaders have returned to be with their families. Others have returned to spread the word as much as they can, and others are going into hiding. It's a very individual decision. There is a de facto consensus that we as leaders have a moral obligation to spread the word to the Chinese people throughout the country in terms of what has happened at Tiananmen Square.
Were they frightened, feeling beaten after Sunday?
It's not a frightened feeling. It's a feeling of resignation, sadness, but more than anything else, that defiance. I mean, this is going to be, they may have lost the battle for freedom. And
did any of them say that?
One of them told me that after this atrocity, this is no longer a battle just for the concepts of freedom, democracy. This is a battle for decency. It's a battle for basic human rights as to how the Chinese government will treat its own people.
What about the journalists that you know and have worked with? Is there any sense on their part that they will be able to tell the story to the Chinese people, or have they been completely censored?
Completely. Totally. Enormous frustration. That it's like being in a psychological prison. And the leaders, well, people who are leaders in the newspaper organs are also frustrated. They know that their papers could be shut down at any moment if they start to report any kind of truth. And also the presence of armed soldiers with machine guns within their newsroom has a way of making sure that the censorship continues.
How is it for the journalists now compared to the situation even 3 weeks ago when they were reporting on events as they were taking place?
2 or 3 weeks ago, the journalists were joyous for the first time in memory. They were tasting a sense, a feeling of freedom. They were able to report on the truth. At this point, there is a deep, sad resignation in their hearts as to what's going to happen now and in the future. One said we are about to go into the dark ages.
So the government policy worked in the sense that they've completely disbanded and demoralized the movement right now. Everyone is in hiding.
Exactly. The government actions have worked, and I would say that people, workers, Beijing citizens, and students definitely underestimated the brutality of this government. At the same time, the government definitely underestimated the bravery of the people.
Thanks for talking to us.
Okay, thank you.
In a moment, how the Western version of this week's events is getting through to the people in China despite the government's best attempts to block it. We've been talking tonight about how martial law has meant an end to the free flow of information in China. Only the official government line is being broadcast on Chinese television and radio. The censors have also tried to block foreign broadcasts, but it seems that they haven't been entirely successful. Some familiar Western voices, the Voice of America and the BBC World Service, are still being heard in China. 5,000 miles from their homeland, Chinese radio broadcasters with the BBC provide their fellow countrymen with another version of events in China, and so far they're reaching their audience.
Now that the Voice of America, the American Broadcasting Corporation, is being jammed in China, we think that even more people are listening to the Chinese service.
No one knows exactly how many Chinese receive the broadcast, but it's estimated to be in the millions. They listen in groups and relay what they hear. The BBC says it's had messages of appreciation.
Just yesterday, we had a telephone call from somebody in Nanking in central China, apparently quite a senior official, though he didn't give his name. And he telephoned us to say that our output was vital and that people in Nanking and Shanghai depended on the BBC for their daily news.
The Voice of America, on the other hand, is playing a cat-and-mouse game with the Chinese government, chasing each other up and down the radio dial. The Chinese have succeeded in jamming most of VOA's 12 frequencies, so it's added something new to its radio programs.
We are simultaneously broadcasting instructions as to how to build a simple, homemade anti-jamming device out of a paper clip, a rubber band, and a piece of cardboard.
The Voice of America has also begun sending television signals into China. For anyone who can pick them up, VOA's radio announcer will appear in the top of the screen, the Mandarin script on the bottom. In Montreal, political science professor Sam Newmoff of McGill University has been monitoring both the BBC and VOA programs. He says there's a good reason why the Chinese have been jamming the Voice of America.
The major differences between the Voice of America and BBC, frankly, I have found BBC to be very prudent, very responsible, and very accurate in its reporting, whereas the VOA Voice of America has tended to be suggestive and, in my judgment, really somewhat provocative.
Well, the Voice of America isn't engaged in any sort of polemics. We don't make promises. We simply carry news and information.
But Professor Newmoff says there seems to be two kinds of presentations coming from the VOA.
One was designed to be accurate, to be, if you will, independent and neutral. The other was designed to give the students a sense of encouragement, but encouragement, in my judgment, in the wrong direction.
Finally tonight, we're going to talk once again to Louise Branson, who's a reporter for the London Sunday Times. On Monday night, gunfire broke out at a military command post just outside her apartment window. Last night, she told us of her plans to evacuate her 4-month-old son. Tonight, we thought we'd check in with her again. Now, Louise, you have just returned from the airport and put your son, Thomas, on an airplane. What was it like at the airport?
Well, surprisingly, there was not the panic that I have heard. The airport was packed. Controls were very lax. My husband and I went right through customs without being asked for anything to see Thomas off with our friends. So no panic, but a lot of people.
You've sent your son out to Hong Kong to be met by your mother and taken back to England.
That's right. A friend of ours was returning to Hong Kong, and my mother will meet him at the other end and take him to her village in England, where toys are already pouring into their house and equipment and offers of babysitting. People are very excited about him coming.
So there's no security, particularly no military presence at the airport?
No, just at the beginning of the road to the airport, there is a military camp. There are soldiers with machine guns between the trees. It was a little scary to go past that point, but once you've passed that, the road is very pretty in the morning sunshine. It's almost as though the city is normal.
Who's at the airport? Is it still the foreigners trying to get out?
Yes, all planes are packed, and it is foreigners, mostly women and children, and businessmen and non-essential diplomats. People just feel it's better to be out while the situation is still so uncertain.
But things aren't completely calm. You're no longer able to stay in the journalist compound where you had been sleeping.
That's right. We evacuated to a friend's apartment in Taiyuan, further north. However, my husband did come back here last night because our computers are here and he wanted to file. He said there was shooting around the compound. He went out at about midnight. He wanted to go to a nearby hotel to fax a story. Halfway there, he realized he'd forgotten the number. He came back to the compound. As he entered the apartment, the phone was ringing. It was a colleague at the hotel telling him not to come because there was shooting at the hotel, and a couple of foreign journalists had been shot at, although they were not hurt.
Do you know, why is that? Why are they shooting at the journalist compound?
I believe that they want this compound to be empty because this is a very strategic position guarding the eastern and northern approaches to the city. If there is some kind of a battle here, then this will be a strategic location. The apartments will be strategic, and I think they don't want foreigners here, and they want the apartments empty.
Well, do you feel in danger?
No, surprisingly, during the day it's very quiet, and we are not going to stay in the compound during the day. We'll remove to Taiyuan, where it's very peaceful. Life is going on much as normal. It's a very strange feeling.
They want you out of the country. Are you planning to leave?
I have decided that if diplomats leave, then I will leave then. I don't feel that it's right to stay on after that.
Thanks for talking to us, Louise.
Thank you.
Tonight, there's an uneasy quiet settling over Beijing. But life for students and other residents of China's capital is anything but normal under martial law. Tomorrow night, we hope to bring you a report from the journal's Alan Abel on life in Beijing.
We will also look